A woman disappears from her own home, and everyone believes she has been replaced. Julian moves on with Serena, thinking the past is gone and the
I have
truth
some
will
difficult
never
news.
return. But far away,
Your
Eleanor
mother
is
has
not
left.
defeated. She is silent,
Welcome home.
watching,
I think you'll
waiting
be
for the
very
right
happy here.
moment.
It's
Because
absolutely
sometimes the
perfect.
quietest
Do
person
you
in the
think she
room
saw us?
is the one preparing the most powerful comeback. And when the truth finally rises, everything changes. Value and lesson. Never underestimate someone who stays silent. They might be preparing the strongest return of their life. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video one like and one share to support the channel and motivate us to create more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The night Marcus Thorne introduced his new protege at a party in their Central Park penthouse, he gathered his 3 children in the library, looked into their confused faces, and said, "Your mother has to stay in Paris to handle some business." His wife, Isabel, 7 months pregnant, was an ocean away in a quiet Parisian hospital, holding her father's hand as he passed. She had no idea her key card to their private elevator had been deactivated. She had no idea another woman was sipping champagne from her wedding flutes. And she had absolutely no idea that in less than 72 hours, she would become one of the most formidable forces in the international art world. What Marcus didn't know, what no one in that glittering, glass-walled apartment knew, was that Isabel's father was Armand de la Rocha, the Armand de la Rocha, the reclusive dealer whose collection was the bedrock of the modern art market, with a $40 billion portfolio of masterpieces, galleries, and private trusts. And every last canvas, every sculpture, every dollar of that cultural empire had just been willed to a single heir, his daughter. The same woman Marcus had just locked out of her own home, the same woman whose meticulous catalog of their private art collection was now in a box destined for a storage unit. The same woman whose 11-year-old son was in his room, secretly recording the party chatter on his tablet before his father's new protege could erase all traces of his mother. But this is where the story you think you know takes a sharp turn. Isabel did not scream. She did not bargain. She did not even send a single angry message. She mourned her father. She read his private journals. She met with the directors of his foundation. And then she walked onto the main stage at the Christie's Fall Auction, an event her husband's firm was sponsoring, took the podium, and watched Marcus's face turn to ash as he finally understood whose name was now listed as the sole proprietor of the De La Rocha estate. What she did next is something his reputation will never recover from. This narrative will show you 3 moments where Isabel was brought to her breaking point. 2 moments where she thought she had clawed back control, only to have it snatched away again. And 1 final, silent gesture that will have you cheering. Stay with me. Every detail is crucial. Here's the principle this story is founded upon. Quiet is not passive. Stillness is not surrender. And the most powerful person in any room is rarely the one making the most noise. It is the one who understands the provenance of power and waits for the perfect moment to make a single, game-changing acquisition. If you have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or had your work claimed by someone who should have been your champion, this story is for you. If this is striking a chord with you, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Leave a comment and tell me, at what point did you realize Marcus's world was about to crumble? Was it the elevator key card, the boxed-up art catalog, or the auction house podium? I read every single one, and your perspectives are always brilliant. Share this with someone who needs this reminder. And if you stick around to the very end, you will understand why the most powerful move is the one no one sees coming. I'll see you in the next installment. The night Marcus Thorne brought his girlfriend home, he stood before his children and told them Their mother had to go away. He actually believed his own performance. He'd rehearsed the lines in the reflection of his Maybach for 3 days, adjusting his tone, practicing a look of pained responsibility, sculpting the perfect image of a man pretending to be burdened while feeling nothing but liberation. By the time he delivered that speech in the library of a home Isabel had curated for over 10 years, the lie had been repeated so many times it felt like an established fact. But 40 floors below, in a climate-controlled vault, a team of 4 art handlers in quiet, gray uniforms were stepping out of a freight elevator. They carried specialized, acid-free portfolios. They spoke in hushed tones, and they held the authentication documents that would systematically deconstruct Marcus Thorne's entire life before he even had a chance to uncork a second bottle of champagne. But this story doesn't begin in that vault. It doesn't start with authentication papers or the cold, precise execution of a will. It starts 11 years prior, with a woman who learned to downplay her own genius for a man who was terrified of her brilliance. If you think you've heard this story before, I can assure you, you haven't. The penthouse on Billionaire's Row was Isabel's magnum opus, from the specific shade of white on the walls that shifted with the morning light to the last hand-forged bronze fixture on the terrace. She had selected every texture: cool travertine floors, gallery-quality lighting, a minimalist kitchen with a single block of Italian marble she had personally sourced from a quarry outside Carrara, while Marcus was at a real estate summit in Dubai. She sourced the rare 17th century bookshelves for their library from a monastery in Spain, flew over twice to oversee their transport with her son, Liam, in tow, and had them installed herself before Marcus came home and asked if she had finally gotten rid of those dusty old things. She hadn't expected him to get it. She finished cataloging their contents after he went to bed. The children's art was displayed in a rotating series of museum-quality frames in the hall, not just stuck on the fridge, but professionally matted and lit. Because Isabel understood that when you present a child's work with dignity, you are teaching them that their vision has value. And children remember that. Liam, at 7, had drawn a detailed architectural plan for a city in the clouds. Sophie, at 5, had painted mythical animals on her tablet with colors so vivid they seemed to hum. Little Leo, age 2, had made a series of joyful fingerprints on a canvas that he insisted was a portrait of their cat, a fluffy rag doll named Gatsby. Isabel had saved every work in a private digital archive, with the date and a short audio clip of each child describing their piece. She was that type of person, the kind who curated the small moments because she knew that our history is the most precious collection we will ever own. On the kitchen's smart screen, pinned by a digital icon shaped like the Eiffel Tower, was a list of groceries for the French recipes she loved. Her art history journal was on her bedside table, open to page 204 of a dense biography of Artemisia Gentileschi she hadn't had time to complete. Her ballet flats sat by the front door, perfectly aligned, a small ritual she performed every evening. And on the wall of her small home office, in a simple frame that was a permanent fixture, was a quote printed on archival paper. The most powerful statement is often a whisper. Her father had written that to her in a letter after her first gallery show when she was 9 years old, sitting in his cluttered Parisian study, surrounded by the smell of old books and turpentine. The lesson was that loud declarations were for amateurs. True mastery was in the subtle, quiet gesture that changes how everyone sees the room. She had woven that philosophy into her life, like a secret signature. The apartment smelled of her, of coffee, and the faint, clean scent of the oil paints she used, and something warm and welcoming that guests could never identify. It smelled like a home that had been painstakingly curated and deeply cherished by a mind that saw everything, and none of it, not the warmth, not the 10 years of a woman pouring her soul into a home and a family, none of it stood a chance against what was about to happen. Here is something to remember. You can write this down. The first sign a partnership is failing is never the grand betrayal. It's the small inconsistency you dismiss. The call he takes on the balcony. The laptop lid he closes when you walk in. The kiss that was once a deep connection and is now just a brief formality on your cheek. Pay attention to the small inconsistencies. They are the footnotes of a story that is about to end. Isabel had 3 children. Liam was 11, quiet and observant, with his mother's curatorial eye that made other adults feel uncultured. He read catalogs from Sotheby's and books on art restoration. He saw everything, noticed every detail, and spoke only when he had a definitive observation. Isabel called him her little historian, and it was the highest compliment she could give, because she had been one too. Sophie was 8, a gentle soul, an artist who was sensitive to the emotional colors most people ignored. She was always sketching on her tablet, creating a world of friendly dragons and smiling stars. She would grow quiet and withdrawn when her parents had tense conversations, even in hushed voices, because Sophie could feel the emotional atmosphere of a room shift, like a change in the weather. And little Leo was 3 years old, a whirlwind of pure, happy energy that Isabel found both draining and utterly beautiful. He hid things in new places. He once greeted a delivery man with, "Hi, Papa," in front of 2 of their neighbors, and Isabel had to gently explain that no, the kind man from the cafe was not his father. Leo just called any man bringing them pastries Papa. This had included a mailman and, most memorably, a chef on a cooking program. He adored his mother with the complete, unconditional faith of a small child who has not yet learned that love can have terms and conditions. Isabel was 7 months pregnant. She moved through the home she had created with one hand on her stomach, quietly telling the baby about the colors of a sunset over the park and the profound beauty of a perfectly balanced composition. Noah felt it first, standing unnoticed in the archway of the study, listening to his mother talk to a baby that hadn't arrived yet. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her with a profound, solemn understanding in his 10-year-old eyes, then turned and walked silently away. Chloe Sterling met Marcus Thorne at a charity gala in New York on a crisp, clear evening in October. Marcus had a gravitational pull. Certain men are born with it, a casual confidence that rearranges the energy of a room the moment they enter. He had a disarming smile and a way of listening that made you feel like your ideas were the most fascinating theories he'd ever heard. He was brilliant, incisive, and hummed with an ambition that felt like a current pulling you in. And Chloe was caught in the tide before the auctioneer had even started the bidding. But when they were alone, away from the clinking glasses and professional posturing, a different man surfaced, one with a surprising tenderness. He'd brush a stray curl from her face while she explained a complex design concept. On their second date, he had a bottle of her favorite obscure Italian red waiting at the table, a wine she'd only mentioned in passing. He understood her technical, architectural jokes that flew over most people's heads, which is the most intoxicating kind of charm, the kind that makes you feel not just desired, but truly understood. She fell for all of it. The way you fall when you're young and believe that the person you meet is the person who will remain. What Chloe had neglected to share, what Marcus had no clue about, was that her father was Robert Sterling. If you followed New York real estate for the last 30 years, you knew the name. One financial paper had called him the patriarch of Park Avenue. He'd constructed his legendary development empire not on flashy towers, but on quiet, strategic acquisitions of forgotten properties, one visionary project at a time, over 3 decades of discipline, and an immunity to market fads that sometimes cost him in the short term, but made him an icon in the long run. Robert Sterling's personal fortune was a number that seemed abstract to most, yet Chloe's upbringing was anything but lavish. Her mother had died when she was just a girl. Her grandmother, Helen, raised her in a rambling shingled house in the Hamptons, a universe away from the Fifth Avenue penthouse with its uniformed doorman. She grew up on a quiet stretch of beach where the nearest neighbor was a retired poet who'd bring them fresh clams and called her Clo-Clo. Helen Sterling believed that wealth without purpose was a gilded prison. Kneeling in her vegetable garden one afternoon, her hands dark with soil, she told Chloe, "Money you don't make yourself is an anchor, darling, not a sail. It will either hold you in place or make you a target. You have to build your own boat first. Then," she continued, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek, "you'll always know who loves you for your navigation and who just wants a ticket on your yacht." Chloe took that lesson and etched it into her soul, right alongside her grandmother's lobster roll recipe and the sound of the Atlantic crashing on the shore at dawn, and she carried it with her always. She told Marcus her father was in property development. She orchestrated a single, brief lunch for them before the wedding. Robert Sterling sat across from Marcus in a starkly minimalist restaurant for exactly 1 hour, drank a black coffee, asked 3 laser-focused questions, and was otherwise silent. He took a car back to his office that same afternoon. That evening, as Chloe was sketching at the kitchen island, her father stood in the doorway and said, without ceremony or judgment, just a quiet, unvarnished truth, "He loves the woman you are becoming for him. Just be certain he also loves the woman you are when you're just drawing your blueprints." Chloe nodded, believing she understood. It would be another 11 years before she would fully comprehend what her father had seen in that 1 hour. Their first years were brilliant, full of the excitement and synergy of building a life when your future is a skyscraper you're designing together, rising story by story in perfect alignment. Chloe built her own boutique architectural firm from the ground up, one visionary client at a time. She raised Noah, then Ava. She turned their Tribeca loft into a masterpiece of warmth and design. She was happy, or perhaps more accurately, Marcus was powerful and she was fulfilled, and she had not yet realized those were 2 entirely different states of being. The first hairline fractures appeared in year 7. Marcus's law firm had a landmark merger. He began working later, traveling constantly. It felt like the price of success. In year 8, the subtle criticisms started. On her designs, "It's brilliant, but maybe a little too academic for that client." On her parenting, "You let Ava get away with too much." In year 9, he stopped reaching for her in the dark. If she initiated, he would sigh that he was exhausted, always so exhausted, a weariness that was less about a lack of sleep and more about a tectonic shift in his desires. Year 10. Chloe found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. She told Marcus, over a rare, quiet dinner at home, her voice trembling with a cautious hope she hadn't felt for a long time. His reaction was neither anger nor celebration. It was a fractional pause, a mental recalculation, followed by, "Okay, we'll have to adjust the timeline for the nursery renovation." It was the logistical response of a man already outlining his next chapter, unaware the draft was open for others to see. Sienna Vance joined a rival law firm Marcus was up against in a hostile takeover battle 14 months before the Tuesday that changed everything. She was 32, a junior partner with a reputation for relentless, calculated aggression. She specialized in one thing, identifying powerful men who had begun to see the brilliant women in their lives as comfortable fixtures rather than essential collaborators. She didn't try to charm Marcus. That was too simple. She challenged him. She asked him about the cases he regretted losing and the legacy he was truly building. Questions Chloe no longer asked because she thought they had built the answers together. Sienna made his long-held ambitions feel new and urgent again. She would say things like, "Your wife is a genius. I hope she appreciates the kind of battlefield you're on every day. And you operate on a strategic level that must feel isolating at times." And then she said the one thing that found its mark. "I just feel like a man with your kind of vision needs an equal partner in ambition, not just an admirer." And Marcus, who had an incredible woman at home curating a new museum wing, managing their family, and carrying their third child, listened to those words and accepted them as truth. Because the most intoxicating lie is always the one that confirms the story you secretly wish was true about yourself. And then there was Beatrice, Marcus's mother. She had been waiting nearly a decade for a crack like this to appear, and she poured herself into the opening like concrete. Beatrice had never truly accepted Olivia. Not for anything Olivia had done, but simply for who she was. Chloe was too self-contained. Her calm demeanor, a product of deep-seated confidence, not of a need for approval. She was too complete on her own. Evelyn had wanted a daughter-in-law she could shape into a social accessory for her son's career. Chloe had arrived fully designed, built on a foundation much older and stronger than Evelyn's, and for this, she was never fully embraced. She would inject her delicate venom into her weekly phone calls with Marcus, that Chloe seemed so preoccupied, that she was so invested in her little design projects, that Chloe's true loyalty was to her own artistic world, not to the family's public image. She said it with concern, she said it often, she said it like a saboteur planting a single, elegant bug, then leaning back to wait for the system to crash. The night it all came apart was a Tuesday in March. Chloe was at the vast kitchen island, making notes on a set of blueprints. 7 months pregnant. Her ankles were swollen. Her lower back radiated the constant, low-grade ache that is the signature of a third trimester, too minor to be a complaint, too persistent to be forgotten. The children were asleep. The loft was finally silent. Marcus was at his desk a few feet away, on his laptop, confirming details for a sudden weekend deposition, upstate. He was toggling between windows when the large, smart screen on the kitchen wall, their shared family hub, suddenly refreshed. A new event popped up in his color. Blue on the calendar. SV, weekend at the Glenmere. Her breath caught. She didn't move. The Glenmere was a famously romantic, exclusive hotel. The entry note read simply, "Confirmation 792, suite secured." And below it, a location link for a spa, for this coming weekend. A weekend he was supposed to be working. Chloe slowly slid a sheet of vellum over her blueprints. The soft whisper of the paper was the loudest, most definitive sound she had ever heard. She didn't look over at him. She didn't make a sound. She walked down the hall to the master bathroom, gripped the edge of the cool marble vanity, and stared at her own reflection. 7 months pregnant, in the magnificent home she had designed and built, looking at digital proof that the man she had built it all with was planning an intimate escape with a woman whose initials were now burned into her mind. She inhaled 10 slow, measured breaths. She had to anchor herself to something she could manage, because in one instant, everything else had become unmanageable. 10 breaths. Then she splashed cold water on her face, walked back to the kitchen, and poured him a glass of his favorite single malt scotch. 2 ice cubes, no more, no less. She placed it on the coaster beside his laptop. When Marcus glanced up from his screen, saw the drink, and muttered a distracted, "Thanks, Chloe." She just nodded. He picked up the glass, retreated to his study, and they didn't exchange another word that night. When you discover a betrayal of that magnitude, the first instinct is often to unleash a storm, to scream, to accuse, to demand answers on the spot. But here's the secret no one ever shares. The moment you confront them without a plan, you hand them all the control. They get to feign regret. They get to twist reality. They get to weep or rage or make it your fault. And you are the one left standing in the wreckage of a life they secretly destroyed. So, if you can manage it, and it is the most difficult thing imaginable, you pause. Not for weeks, just long enough to guarantee that when you finally move, you are not simply reacting. For the next few weeks, Lena cultivated a quiet that her husband Damien totally misread. He saw it as her sinking into the usual exhaustion of her third trimester. He took it for the silence of defeat, the kind that always came before either a messy argument or a gradual, bitter surrender. He was sure she was giving in. He had no idea she was just beginning to fight. Damien didn't register that the quality of her silence had shifted. Lena no longer initiated the conversations he would so easily brush aside. She no longer reached for his hand in the dark. She began taking more calls on the balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, her voice a low, clinical murmur, speaking in the precise language of provenance and art history that was hers alone. Damien felt her withdraw into her work at the museum and was relieved. That immediate, uncomplicated feeling of ease confirmed every fear Lena had been suppressing. When the person you love pulls away, you are supposed to feel a sense of dread, not tranquility. Damien felt tranquil, and that told her their marriage was already a beautiful, hollowed-out ruin. She was merely the last to admit it was over. The flight was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Lena was in the kitchen, organizing meals for her son Max's week, humming along to a classical music station. The hotel in Florence was confirmed. This trip to Italy was for her mentor, Professor Alistair Finch, and it was not a holiday. It was the culmination of a project that would define her entire career. Alistair Finch was a titan in the art world who had retreated to a villa in Tuscany after a personal loss. He had become her guide, her advocate, and Lena always approached obstacles with a calm, analytical grace. Every move was considered, every bit of her focus aimed at the next logical action. Her suitcases were packed in less than 1 hour. She sent an email to the school about Max and Sophie. She had 5 days of dinners portioned and labeled in the freezer. She left Damien a note about their daughter's upcoming dentist appointment, already confirmed twice, with the clinic's contact and insurance card attached to the smart screen on the refrigerator. Before the car arrived, she found Damien in his study reviewing blueprints and calmly went over her schedule, where she was staying, and her return date. She asked him to please make sure Sophie got to that appointment. Damien pecked her on the cheek, said something dismissive about her little art project, and was already dialing his phone before her car had even turned the corner. By the following morning, he had called a locksmith. Dressed in a silk robe, he watched a man replace their digital locks with an entirely new system, and he felt not a flicker of guilt. He had a story now, one his sister, Genevieve, had helped him perfect. In this version, Lena had prioritized her ambition over her family. He was simply responding to a choice she had already made. This is what happens to a man who is slowly convinced by the wrong people that he is the victim. His version of events becomes so vivid it feels like the truth. On Saturday morning, Genevieve was the first to show up. She swept into the penthouse with expensive pastries and a smug, knowing smile that had never once been genuine in 11 years of knowing Lena. She placed the box on the marble island and began to survey the apartment as if it were her own, opening closets, judging furniture, and pausing in doorways with a triumphant look of someone reclaiming lost land. Her new fiancé, Alex, trailed behind her, quiet and anxious, carrying luggage from a luxury sedan. He tripped on the edge of the oriental rug, catching himself on the wall with a quiet apology. Alex wasn't a bad person. To be fair, he was just a man who had let the desire for a comfortable life harden into a silence that was impossible to distinguish from cowardice. And then, emerging from the car in a striking emerald green dress and carrying 2 designer suitcases, as if she owned the place, was Chloe. She walked through the front door, down the corridor, and straight into Lena's master suite. The sound of velvet hangers sliding across the polished brass rod was a faint, sharp signal of erasure that Lena witnessed through her tablet speaker, thousands of miles away. Damien knelt in the family room, Lena's family room, with its walls covered in the children's paintings and the antique globe tilted toward the city skyline. He looked at each of his children with the unique calm of a man utterly convinced he was in the right. "Your mother made a decision," he explained. "She chose that museum over us. She is not coming back to this home, but I am here, and I am never going to leave you." Genevieve stood behind him, nodding like a devoted follower. Alex stared at his shoes. Sophie, sensing the change in the room's atmosphere, had already pulled her little brother onto her lap, trying to shield him from something she couldn't understand. And Max, 12 years old, stood at the entrance to the hall. He stared at his father for a very long time. He didn't make a sound. He didn't protest. He just observed him with clear, assessing eyes and said absolutely nothing. Then he turned, walked to his room, and closed the door with the soft, decisive click of a boy who had just filed away a piece of information about his father that could never be erased. In a quiet hotel suite in Florence, overlooking the Arno River and smelling of old paper and espresso, Lena watched it all on her tablet's live feed. Professor Alistair Finch sat in an armchair next to her, his expression as unreadable as an ancient text. His steady breathing was the only sound, a slow, patient rhythm. He was a man who had spent his life navigating the cutthroat world of high-stakes art, and he knew a hostile takeover when he saw one. On the antique desk between them lay a linen-bound folder. Dr. Lena Vance was written on the label. It was the acquisition offer, the legal document that would make her the head of a new global acquisitions department for a major foundation. He had intended to present it to her after their work was done. She hadn't looked at it, not yet. Instead, she spoke to him. She told him about Max's science fair project, a small volcano that had erupted all over their kitchen island 2 weeks ago. She told him about Sophie's recent fascination with ballet, how she practiced her positions in front of every reflective surface in their home. She told him about the baby's constant battle with her bladder, and she thought she saw the corner of Alistair's mouth lift in a faint smile. She told him about the baby kicking every night around 10 p.m., as if it were already on a European schedule. She told him she was thinking of naming him Leo. She anchored herself to these small, warm, real details because she was not yet ready for the weight of what was in that folder, and because a part of her felt she could still hear the life that was being taken from her. Alistair Finch passed away from a massive stroke on the 4th morning peacefully, in the gray light just before dawn, with his protégé closing her tablet beside him and the distant sound of church bells ringing across the city. Lena sat with his absence for a long time. The grief would come later, a deep, silent ache she would have to navigate on her own. Then she opened the folder. Inside were 3 parts: a handwritten note from Alistair, a thick stack of legal papers, and a smaller, sealed envelope with her children's names on it, along with a line that said, "For their education." The documents confirmed what his lawyers would explain later. Every contact, every endowment, every private treaty sale, every connection, the entire acquisitions power of the Finch collection, with an operating fund independently valued by appraisers at over $500 million, was now under the authority of one person, Dr. Lena Vance, his protege, his intellectual successor, the woman who had only ever wanted the chance to discover something beautiful. Lena read the executive summary twice. Then she put it down, walked to the tall window, and watched the sunrise over Florence, the sky turning to rose and gold, completely unmoved by the life that had just been fundamentally altered. She did not change her flight. Not yet, because she had a legacy to protect. And because in that quiet, she was designing a response that no one on the other side of the world could ever possibly imagine. Lena stayed in Italy for 2 weeks. She coordinated her mentor's arrangements with calm resolve, taking calls from museum directors and cultural ministers who wished to honor the man who had shaped their world. She reviewed every document in his digital records, sitting at his desk, surrounded by the glow of the screen. She posed every question to his legal team 3 times, in 3 different ways. She did not hurry. She did not make a scene. She downloaded the entirety of what Alistair had built over 50 years, and she let it become a part of her own operating system. Deep, permanent, and fully installed. She only cried once, the night before she was due to fly back to Chicago. Alone in the hotel, she held a smooth, cool stone from the riverbank in her hand and looked at a photograph on her screen. Lena, at her doctoral graduation, beaming, her diploma held high, while Damien stood next to her, smiling at the camera, with a look she now recognized as possession, not pride. Marcus surveyed the Chicago skyline from his penthouse office, his gaze lingering on the Thorn Tower, the crown jewel of his real estate empire. It wasn't the arrogance of a king surveying his kingdom, but the deep, quiet pride of a builder. Amelia cherished that image of him. Then she drew a steadying breath, squared her shoulders, and for the first time truly became Amelia Thorne, the architect of her own future. But her day of reckoning was still a world away. Before Amelia could lay the first stone of her new life, she had to survive a demolition. The first blow landed not in a courtroom, but in the sterile quiet of a Dubai hotel suite. She was there overseeing the final touches on a resort she had designed, a testament to her talent. When the first photos appeared in their shared family cloud storage, she was 8 months pregnant, scrolling through images of her own home when she saw it. A woman named Sienna, an interior designer Marcus had recently hired, was directing painters in Amelia's living room. A follow-up photo showed her laughing with Marcus at their kitchen island, drinking from Amelia's favorite mug. Amelia's blood ran cold. Then she saw the final picture, Sienna, curled on the sofa with Amelia's children, reading them a bedtime story. "I am so sorry you feel this way, Amelia," Marcus said when she called, his voice a carefully modulated performance of concern. "But you chose to be on the other side of the world. The kids needed consistency, and Sienna has been a lifesaver. We've all been struggling since your work became your priority." The words were a wrecking ball, perfectly aimed to shatter her foundation, casting her as the absent mother from 7,000 miles away. Less than a day later, an email from a concerned parent at her children's school began making the rounds. Famed architect Amelia Thorne reportedly extends overseas trip, leaving family behind. Sources say developer husband Marcus Thorne is managing beautifully, with help from a close friend. Amelia's phone buzzed incessantly. Texts from acquaintances, calls from Marcus's family, even messages from his business partners, all asking if things were okay, each one a subtle chisel, chipping away at her reputation. Back in their Gold Coast penthouse, Sienna had already begun her conquest. A hand-carved rocking horse Amelia's grandfather had made for her was gone, replaced by a sleek, minimalist bench. The colorful mural of a forest Amelia had painted on her son Oliver's wall was gone, as was the gallery of Lily's art on the refrigerator. A decade of a family's story, told in crayon and paint, had been erased with a single coat of neutral beige. One layer of paint had covered 10 years of a mother's joy. Her daughter, Lily, FaceTimed her that night. Her 9-year-old face was a careful mask, trying so hard to be brave. "Mommy, when is your work trip over?" "Soon, my sweet girl. I promise." There was a pause, filled with static. She painted over Oliver's forest wall. Amelia's world tilted. I took a picture of it first. It's saved on my tablet. A long, shaky breath crackled over the speaker. "Mommy, are you there?" "I'm here, baby. I'm always here." After the call, Amelia walked to the hotel window, overlooking the glittering city she had helped shape, and she shattered. It wasn't a quiet grief, not a few silent tears. It was a raw, guttural sob. The kind where your body is racked with tremors, and you press your forehead against the cool glass, trying to anchor yourself to something solid while your world turns to dust. 8 months pregnant. Her life's work being celebrated halfway across the world. Her children being taught that she had been replaced. Her very existence being methodically wallpapered over by a woman who was sleeping in her bed. Sometimes the entire structure gives way at once. The betrayal, the grief, the crushing helplessness all converge into a single point of failure. The most dangerous thing you can do in that moment is make a permanent decision based on the temporary chaos of the collapse. So you weep, you fall apart, you let the wreckage be what it is, but you do not rebuild until the dust settles. And the dust always settles. Amelia's dust settled at 30,000 feet, somewhere over the Atlantic. She wiped her face, ordered a sparkling water, and called her best friend Zara from the plane's Wi-Fi. Zara wasn't just her friend. She was one of the most ruthless family law attorneys in Chicago. Amelia knew the hardest part was not behind her. It had just begun. "Your name is on the original architectural grants for half his properties, Amelia. Your designs are the intellectual property his entire portfolio was built on. You could file an injunction and freeze his operating accounts by morning. You could gut his company and turn it into a non-profit for abandoned kittens. Zara, I just want my kids. I know. But you have leverage. Extremely expensive leverage." For the first time in days, Amelia felt a flicker of strength. She called Marcus from Zara's car. The legal filings were prepared. She now had a formidable attorney, a mountain of documentation proving her contributions, and the unshakable power of being the creative genius behind the Thorn real estate brand. She told Zara she was going home to get her children. Zara squeezed her hand. "Go get your babies, Mama Bear. We'll draft the demolition orders for the rest of his life later." Her key card for the penthouse elevator was deactivated. Of course it was. She had to use the building's intercom, buzzing her own home like a stranger, 8 months pregnant and exhausted, and she waited. Marcus opened the door. Beside him stood his business partner, David, wearing a pained expression. And in the living room, Sienna was curled on Amelia's couch, reading a magazine with the unbothered air of a woman who was already the queen of the castle. Marcus handed her a thick envelope. It was a temporary restraining order, alleging that Amelia's high-pressure career and obsessive work habits had made her an emotionally volatile and unstable presence, and that her sudden return posed a risk to the children's well-being. It was supported by a signed affidavit from David, detailing fabricated instances of Amelia's supposed meltdowns over project deadlines. Amelia was legally barred from her own home. She was forbidden from contacting her children. She stood in the marble lobby of the building she had helped design, holding a court document that branded her a threat. As the door clicked shut, she looked up and saw her son Oliver's face, small and confused, pressed against the window of the living room. He silently mouthed one word. "Mommy." Amelia raised a hand, pressing her palm against the cold, empty air. Oliver mirrored the gesture, his tiny hand flat against the glass. Then David's shadow moved behind him, and the automated blinds were lowered. Amelia took a cab to a nearby hotel. She sat in the back of the car for 20 minutes after it stopped, unable to command her body to move. She called Zara, who answered immediately. "Where are you? Tell me what happened." He filed a restraining order. "I can't see my kids." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, a black hole of fury. Zara's voice, when it came, was terrifyingly calm. "Amelia, I want you to repeat that, very slowly, because my brain is refusing to process what you just said. I need you. I'm on my way. Don't move. Don't text him. Don't even breathe in his direction. I'm bringing Thai food and a scorched earth legal strategy." Zara burst into the hotel room 30 minutes later with 2 bags of takeout, a laptop, and a look that could make a judge weep. She spread documents on the bed, handed Amelia a container of curry, and said, "Okay, here's how this goes. We eat, we list every project you ever designed for his firm, and then we prepare a lawsuit so financially devastating he won't be able to afford cheap coffee, let alone a legal defense." David Chen is first on the list because D is for disbarred, which is what he's going to be after we file a motion for perjury, and also because I never trusted him after that disastrous charity gala in 2022. Against all odds, Amelia let out a small, watery laugh. Zara's office filed for an emergency hearing, but the court was swamped. The date was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks. 336 hours without her children. Lily called her on her tablet, whispering from inside her closet during her designated screen time. "Mommy, Oliver keeps asking when you'll be home from your trip. He's been carrying around your yellow hard hat. Sienna says I need to stop drawing so much. I'm trying to be brave, but I don't know what to do. You don't have to do anything but be you, my love. I'm handling it. I promise you, I'm coming home." She donated the rocking horse, the one Grandpa made. I saw the truck take it. A beat of silence. But I saved the picture of Oliver's forest wall, Mommy. I took a picture before she had them paint over it. I saved it for him. Every single tree. Amelia held the phone against her heart, closing her eyes and breathing through the sharp spike of pain. The way you breathe when a building's foundation is being poured, slow, steady, one section at a time. If you ever find yourself in a battle for your children, here is the only piece of advice that matters. Document everything. Every email, every text message, every shared photo, every missed call. Keep copies in 3 places: your device, a secure cloud, and with your attorney. The court doesn't operate on emotion, no matter how righteous your anger is. The court operates on evidence. Your only job is to be the person with the most evidence. The hearing was 2 weeks later. Zara and her team dismantled Marcus's petition in 27 minutes. The judge looked pointedly at the travel records, school communications, and financial statements, proving Amelia was not only an involved parent, but also the primary architect of the family's wealth. He dismissed the restraining order with an explicit warning to Marcus about filing frivolous claims. The restraining order was granted. Eleanor was given immediate temporary custody of the children. She drove straight to the house in Pacific Heights. Her kids saw her Tesla pull into the drive and rushed out before she could even unbuckle. Little Ben wrapped himself around her legs, burying his face in her coat. Sophie clung to her mother's arm, silent and trembling. Liam, her eldest, tried to stay stoic. But when Eleanor opened her arms to him, he folded into her embrace and just held on. Marcus was ordered to vacate the property within 72 hours. That evening, standing in her home with her children finally safe with her, Eleanor allowed herself a single thought. It's done. I have my children. I have my father's legacy. I'll file for divorce, and this entire nightmare will finally end. But Eleanor had no idea the real nightmare was still 48 hours away, and that it would start with her world going black on the kitchen floor. One moment, she was reviewing an art auction catalog for the nursery, and the next, she was on the cool marble floor, a pen slipping from her grasp as a silent darkness enveloped her. It was the culmination of stress, of sleepless nights, of forgetting to eat. 8 months of carrying a new life through an avalanche of grief, betrayal, and a brutal legal fight, all without a moment to simply breathe. Liam dialed 911. He gave the dispatcher their address with a preternatural calm, a composure no 12-year-old should ever have to possess. With his younger brother Ben balanced on one hip and his free hand holding their golden retriever by the collar, he said, "My mom is pregnant. She just passed out, and I can't wake her up. Please, you have to send an ambulance now." At the hospital, the medical team stabilized both Eleanor and the baby, but the diagnosis was severe: strict, mandatory bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. No stress, no travel. She couldn't even walk to the restroom without her best friend, Isabel, or a nurse at her side. Within a day, Marcus's attorney had filed an emergency motion, arguing that Eleanor was medically fragile and mentally unfit to care for her children, demanding custody be immediately and fully restored to him. The second offensive landed the next morning. A major tech publication ran a front-page story online. An anonymous source had leaked Eleanor's identity as the daughter and sole heir of the reclusive tech pioneer, the late Edward Vancey. The story wasn't framed as an inheritance, but as a long con. Silicon Valley, by they see, blindsided by wife's secretive billion-dollar tech fortune. In a single stroke, the narrative was completely inverted. Eleanor was no longer the betrayed pregnant wife. She was recast as the deceptive heiress who had manipulated her self-made husband. The comment sections were a toxic wasteland of misogyny and scorn. Marcus, booked by Sienna's PR firm, appeared on a popular tech podcast, masterfully playing the role of the shocked, wounded spouse. "I never knew," he said, his voice cracking with rehearsed disbelief. "She kept the Vancey group, all of it, a secret from me for our entire marriage. I'm left wondering if our whole life was a lie. My only focus now is shielding my children from more deception." The third blow hit that afternoon. Liam was at school when a classmate shoved a tablet in his face, displaying the article. The comment thread was open for him to see. Anonymous strangers branding his mother a fraud, a liar, a silver-spoon sociopath who had played a sick game on his father. Liam threw a punch. He was suspended instantly. When Eleanor called him from her hospital bed, his voice was hollowed out. "They're all saying you lied to Dad, that you're the bad person. Everyone believes it. Liam, you have to listen to me." "Is it true? Did you lie?" A painful silence stretched across the phone line, from her sterile room to his. "I never told your father about Grandpa Edward's company. That is true. But I never, ever lied about who I am. I'm the same mom who made you pancakes yesterday and who reads to you every single night." "Then why does the whole internet think you're a monster?" Eleanor had no answer that a 12-year-old could possibly comprehend. She hung up the phone and lay in that clinical bed, a hand resting on her stomach where the baby kicked, staring at the ceiling tiles. For the first time, she let a thought she had always suppressed take hold and grow. Maybe this is a fight I can't win. This was the true bottom. Not discovering the photos of the affair, not being locked out of her own house, not the ambush at her father's memorial service. This, being powerless in a hospital bed, her children exposed, the world branding her a villain, and her own son beginning to doubt her. This is where most people would break. Eleanor Vancy didn't break, but she felt the first hairline cracks appear. When the world recasts you as the antagonist, when a narrative built on lies becomes the public truth, the instinct is to scream your own version of the story. You must not. Not yet. Public opinion is a flash flood. It roars in, and then it recedes. But a legal filing is granite. You focus on the granite. Let the floodwaters rage. The truth is patient. It can wait for the right moment. Eleanor couldn't move, so she began to strategize, first from her hospital bed, and then from the guest suite of Isabel's Nob Hill apartment, where she lived out the final weeks of her pregnancy. She directed her legal team with the icy precision of a woman who had learned from her father that the most decisive battles are won in silence. She hired forensic accountants to map Marcus's financial history. They discovered he'd been siphoning their joint accounts for over a year, funding Sienna's life. The lease on her Marina District condo, her new Porsche, lavish trips to Cabo, and a ridiculously expensive sculpture Eleanor had seen on a statement and foolishly assumed was for his firm's lobby. She was no longer collecting information for a confrontation. She was building an arsenal for a war. A private investigator confirmed Sienna was now living in the Pacific Heights house, sleeping in Eleanor's bed, driving her car, and, the most egregious violation, flaunting a one-of-a-kind smartwatch on her social media, a prototype her father had given her before he died, which Sienna had clearly just found in a drawer and started wearing like some new tech accessory. Digital forensics experts cracked encrypted messages between Marcus and Sienna going back more than a year. One message, sent from Marcus, the day Eleanor flew to Seattle to be by her dying father's side, revealed the depth of his cruelty. 4 words: "The old man is fading, showtime." Isabel visited every day, determined to make Eleanor smile. Isabel was scrolling through the bank records on Eleanor's laptop. He spent $10,000 on a private chef in Napa. For her. $10,000. Eleanor, I've seen this woman's Instagram. Her idea of high cuisine is a spicy margarita. This isn't just theft. It's an insult to good taste. Izzy, please. I'm just saying, if you're going to detonate your life, do it for someone who at least appreciates Michelin stars. In spite of everything, Eleanor laughed. But the piece of information that crystallized her grief into something cold, hard, and permanent came from the court-appointed child therapist. In her clinical notes, the doctor reported that Ben, age 4, had started calling Sienna Cece. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of confusion. Marcus had been coaching him, intentionally, methodically teaching his own son to replace his mother while she was pregnant with his sister, and fighting just to see him. There is a kind of rage that burns hotter than betrayal and deeper than sorrow. It is the fury of a mother who discovers someone has tried to edit her out of her own child's heart. It is the only fuel you will ever need because when it ignites, it does not go out until the job is done. 3 weeks later, Eleanor delivered a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace. Isabel held her hand, and a small framed photo of her father sat on the bedside table. She healed, she grew stronger, and 8 weeks after Grace was born, she was ready. The Vancy Foundation's annual charity benefit was being held at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and for the first time, it would be hosted by its new chairwoman, Eleanor Vancy. The guest list was a curated collection of 600 of the most powerful people in technology, finance, and media. Eleanor personally ensured an invitation was delivered to Marcus's venture capital firm with no host's name listed. The event materials simply said, "The Vancy Foundation," a name Marcus had seen on tax documents for years and dismissed as some minor family charity, never once connecting it to his wife's family. Because Marcus was the kind of man who never thought to Google his own wife's maiden name. Isabel, helping Eleanor with her diamond earrings the night of the benefit, caught her friend's eyes in the mirror. You are about to walk into a museum and casually inform your husband that you could buy his entire investment fund with the money in your checking account, all in front of the woman he left you for. This is the single greatest act of psychological warfare in the history of Silicon Valley, and I am here for it. Eleanor calmly fastened the clasp. It's not warfare, Izzy. It's a market correction. Right. An elegant revenge is still revenge. It just has a much better caterer. The atrium at the SFMOMA was a temple of modern power and minimalist wealth. Soaring white walls were washed with ambient light, and guests moved between massive sculptures, sipping champagne. The air vibrated with the quiet hum of immense capital and influence. Marcus arrived with Sienna on his arm. He was the picture of a tech king, dressed in a $2,000 blazer and designer sneakers, wearing the easy confidence of a man who believed he had won. He located his firm's name on a prime table near the stage and felt a wave of satisfaction. His managing partner gave him a congratulatory nod. Sienna, looking sleek and predatory beside him, scanned the powerful crowd, her eyes calculating the net worth of everyone in the room. Isabel's political allies clustered by the bar, radiating the specific brand of confidence that comes from believing proximity to power is the same as wielding it. A dear friend of Olivia's father stood near the entrance, watching the arrivals with an expression that said he'd much rather be at home with a good book. The evening's host, a respected historian who had known Harrison Davenport for decades, made his way to the lectern. He spoke with deep affection about the museum's mission, its cultural significance, and the man whose family had been its bedrock. A man who believed the greatest inheritance a father could give his daughter was the wisdom to recognize true value. And then he announced, "It is my distinct honor to introduce to you all the new chair of the Davenport Arts Endowment and director of acquisitions for the museum network." The towering oak doors at the opposite end of the grand hall swung inward. There stood Olivia, wearing a gown of emerald silk, its structure as elegant and deliberate as a Sargent portrait. She wasn't trying to make a statement. She was embodying one, and as she started her long walk toward the stage, a silence descended over the gala before, table by table, the entire room got to its feet. The applause began as a murmur and grew into a wave, starting with the old Boston families who understood what the Davenport name meant, then spreading until all 600 attendees were standing. Real estate tycoons, finance moguls, powerful attorneys, and biotech innovators, the very pinnacle of Boston society, all sensed that something significant was unfolding, even if they had never met her personally. Halfway to his mouth, Marcus's champagne flute stopped. At a table nearby, Isabel's carefully constructed smile began to fray, first at the corners, then collapsing completely. Feeling the ground shift beneath her, Marcus's mother gripped his father's arm. His father just stared down at the marble floor and said under his breath, "I told you. I told you this was a bad idea." Olivia reached the lectern and took in the crowd. She did not look for Marcus in the sea of faces. There was no need. For 12 minutes, she spoke about her father, about stewardship, and about the profound difference between building something for your own glory and preserving it for the generations to come. She spoke of her first acquisition, a small, forgotten landscape from a minor painter, and a lesson her father taught her, written on a note she'd kept for 25 years. A masterpiece isn't judged by its frame, but by the strength of its composition. She mentioned a proposal she had written. She didn't say what it was for or what became of it. She simply said, "My father had that first proposal professionally bound, and it has been on my desk for 20 years. Recently, it was discarded by someone who failed to recognize its substance. My 12-year-old son found it in the wastepaper basket and put it back on my shelf because he understood what it represented, even when the adults in the room had forgotten. She allowed the silence to fill the space. The hall was absolutely still. That is what stewardship is. It is not the winning bid. It is not the glamorous unveiling. It is the value your children learn to recognize because you taught them how to truly see. She did not so much as glance toward Marcus's table. She did not have to. Everyone who had heard the whispers, which at this point was everyone, knew exactly what was being left unsaid. And the void where his name should have been echoed louder than any direct accusation. When her speech concluded, after the standing ovation finally subsided and the string trio resumed playing, Marcus navigated his way across the floor. He walked with the uncertain steps of a man who has just grasped that something priceless has been lost and is not yet sure whether to beg for it back or to fight. He said her name. She turned, and 3 lawyers materialized at her elbow with the seamless, practiced timing of a team that had been waiting for that exact cue, prepared for a battle Marcus couldn't even begin to imagine. Mr. Alistair Finch, with his shock of white hair and the bearing of a man who had practiced law in Boston for 3 decades, offered him a slim leather folio. Marcus took it. Inside, he found 5 documents. The first was a divorce petition, drafted with surgical precision and legally impenetrable. The second was an emergency custody motion, giving full temporary custody to Olivia, with supervised visitation for Marcus, already stamped and approved by a judge. The third was a report from a forensic accountant, tracking every transfer from their joint investment funds, every expenditure at a private Newbury Street jeweler, every single deception translated into a ledger entry. The fourth was a notice of property rights, which informed Marcus that the Beacon Hill townhouse, where he had changed the locks and installed his mistress in his pregnant wife's home, was, in fact, an asset of the Davenport family trust. It had been since the day they purchased it 8 years prior, a quiet provision from a father who, after one dinner with Marcus, understood enough to make sure his daughter would always have a foundation to stand upon. Olivia had never felt the need to bring it up until that moment. Marcus had 30 days to vacate the premises. The 5th document was a cease and desist letter addressed to Isabel Rossi concerning campaign finance irregularities, accompanied by a brief, handwritten note from Mr. Finch that said, "The Davenport family has retained legal counsel since 1892. I am certain we can resolve this matter without their full involvement." Marcus just stood there in his $1,000 suit in the middle of the museum gala with 5 documents in his hand. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Thorne had absolutely nothing to say. Olivia looked at him, not with rage, not with a sense of victory, and not even with sadness, though the sadness was a vast and private thing she would have to carry alone for months, like a precious piece of porcelain that had been shattered. She looked at him the way a curator looks at an object that has been deaccessioned from the collection. A clear, professional, final look. Then she turned and walked away, and her legal team fell into formation behind her, like a tide receding from the shore. The hum of the party resumed, and Marcus stood there, finally grasping the true nature of his wife's quiet power. This wasn't karma. Karma suggests some kind of cosmic intervention. This was a consequence, and a consequence is nothing more than simple arithmetic. Marcus lost the townhouse. He spent 28 of his 30 days talking to lawyers who all confirmed the trust was unassailable. He called Isabel, but his calls went to voicemail. He called his mother, who offered prayers but no tangible assistance. He moved into a glass-walled penthouse in the seaport, a space that felt more like a corporate suite, because he had never learned how to create a home. He had only ever acquired properties that others had imbued with meaning. And without her, the total of who he was turned out to be much less than he had ever imagined. Isabel's exit was efficient and unsentimental. No access to the townhouse, no connection to the Davenport legacy, no social advantage, legal threats from a firm that was over a century old. The calculation was not complex. She packed her expensive luggage and moved on without a scene, because women like Isabel do not waste time on explanations. The full picture emerged during discovery. In the division of assets, their lawyers found a digital record revealing Isabel's established pattern. Two other wealthy, married men, two other strikingly similar affairs. Her interest in Marcus was never about romance. It was a fundraising strategy. Liam, his business partner, watched from their office window as Isabel climbed into a black car and just shook his head. He said to the empty room, "Well, that explains a hell of a lot." Beatrice sent a long, rambling email to Olivia, 5 paragraphs in all. It was a baroque piece of emotional manipulation, appealing to their family's reputation, their social duties, and the sacred obligation of maintaining appearances. Olivia read it from start to finish. Then she forwarded the message to her attorney with a 1-sentence instruction. Please add this to the file regarding witness intimidation and emotional duress. She never sent a reply to the email. Liam sent a simple text. "I saw the signs. I should have spoken up. My fault." Olivia read it, allowed the words to settle for a moment, then put her phone away. She did not text him back, but she did not block his number. Olivia was not built for messy resentments. She was built for clean lines and solid structures, and there is an entire world of difference between the two. But the final piece of the story was found in her father's personal desk. Among Harrison Davenport's private papers, Olivia found a letter dated 2 years before he died. In it, Harrison explained that he had hired a private investigator after that first and only dinner he'd had with Marcus. The investigator's report had flagged Isabel's name 11 months before Olivia noticed the suspicious charge on their shared credit card statement. Harrison had known. He opted not to tell her. His letter laid out his reasoning. "You are my daughter. You have the right to discover the world for yourself and to decide how to respond on your own terms. I would never take that power from you, but I will always make sure you have solid ground to stand on when you do." The townhouse, the trust, the legal framework, it was all there. It was her father's final testament, a vintner's patient love letter to the daughter he knew was his finest creation. Amelia read the note just once, folded it precisely, and put it away with his other letters. She then sat in the silence for what felt like an eternity. A year later, on a perfect Saturday morning, the kind of morning reserved for those who have weathered a storm that was meant to shatter them, but couldn't, Amelia is at the large wooden island in her farmhouse kitchen, which overlooks the rolling hills of the vineyard. The home had been slowly, lovingly reclaimed. Her mother's handwritten recipe journals were back on the shelf. The family height chart was restored on the old wine cellar door, each marking painstakingly, recreated from a photo her son Oliver had kept, and near the very bottom there was a fresh, new line. Oliver's new drawings, mostly of dinosaurs, are taped to the refrigerator door. Lily is teaching him how to draw a T-Rex. New, brighter art is everywhere. She has taken over the spare room as her studio. Amelia finishes a conference call with her investors. She is poised, focused, and clear. She carries the unshakable calm of a woman who has not just taken a seat at the table, but has designed and built the table herself. She shuts her laptop, tilting her head back to take a deep, cleansing breath. Her youngest, Liam, rushes in from the vines, his hands carefully cupping a small cluster of deep purple grapes, pulled right from the stem. He presents them to her with the grave importance of a sommelier offering a rare vintage. Amelia studies the grapes, then her son's earnest face, and a laugh escapes her. Not a careful, measured sound, but something genuine, rich, and unrestrained. It was the kind of laughter that only happens when you finally stop pretending and begin to live. Her daughter Chloe wanders in a second later, with baby Finn perched on her hip, playfully pretending to taste an imaginary sauce from a wooden spoon, already learning how to be the heart of a home. Oliver enters last, resting against the doorframe, a relaxed calm on his face as he watches his mother and the little ones. He asks softly, "You okay, Mom?" Amelia looks at her oldest, her anchor. The boy who had rescued her mother's recipe, journals from a penthouse, being liquidated, and who trusted her decision to leave the city without ever needing an explanation. "I'm better than okay, sweetie. I am right where I was always meant to be." And in her heart, she knew it was true. She never caused a drama. She never battled for the Seattle penthouse. She refused to explain her worth to a man whose entire tech empire was built on overvalued stock and empty promises. She simply concentrated, and when the papers were signed, she closed her laptop with a decisive snap, the same sound it made each night after she'd tucked her son in, his sneakers tossed by the doorway and his steady breathing filling the quiet hall. Oliver was lost in thought, his face serene in the fading light. Amelia paused at the entrance to the old barn, where Oliver was drafting plans in a sketchbook. He glanced up. "Hey, your grandfather left this for you," she said. "I planned on waiting until you were older to give it to you, but tonight feels like the right time." She set a weathered wooden wine crate on his workbench. Inside was a handwritten letter from Henry and the original, framed deed to the vineyard's oldest block of vines. A small tag on the deed read, "For the boy who saved the family recipes." Oliver read the letter in a low voice. We only hear the last part. "Look after your mother, not because she's fragile. She is the most resilient person I have ever known, but because true strength deserves to be protected, not endlessly challenged." Oliver gently set the letter down and met his mother's eyes, a new maturity in his gaze. He gave a single, solid nod, the kind a boy gives when he has just chosen the man he intends to become. Amelia brushed the hair from his forehead, lowered the lights, and returned to the warmth of the farmhouse, a home that finally felt entirely hers. If this story connected with you, I invite you to subscribe. And please, share in the comments. At what moment did you suspect that Marcus's tech empire was just smoke and mirrors? I look forward to seeing you in our next story. A final word. This story was carefully developed, written, and produced by our team to deliver a narrative with real emotional weight and meaningful takeaways. Every character, location, and piece of dialogue was crafted to entertain, inspire, and act as a reminder that your worth is never determined by someone who is unable to see it.